The metallic crunch echoed through the mountain air like a gunshot. Karen's pristine Range Rover hung suspended 3 feet off the ground, impaled on a steel bollard that had emerged from the earth like a mechanical predator. Her manicured hands pressed against the windshield, eyes wide with shock as she realized the truth: she'd just destroyed her own vehicle on property that was never hers to block. The retired engineer watching from his cabin porch didn't move to help. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began recording, knowing that 30 years of careful planning had just paid off. And the first time David Chen saw the white Range Rover parked across his driveway, he thought it was a mistake. He'd been coming up to his mountain cabin every weekend for 3 years now, ever since Martha passed. The isolation helped him think, helped him process the grief that still hit him in waves. The cabin sat on 20 acres of pristine Colorado wilderness, accessed by a single gravel road that wound through dense pine forests. His nearest neighbor was half a mile away, a fact that had always been one of the property's greatest selling points. David parked his modest Honda Civic on the main road and walked the quarter-mile to his cabin, his engineering mind automatically cataloging the problem. The Range Rover was positioned perfectly to block access, its gleaming white paint job standing out like a sore thumb against the natural browns and greens of the forest. Colorado plates, expensive rims, not a scratch on it. Someone with money and, apparently, no respect for private property. He spent the weekend wondering who it belonged to, expecting it to be gone by Sunday evening. It wasn't. The second weekend, the Range Rover was there again, this time with a folding chair set up beside it. David approached cautiously, his retired engineer's mind already working through the logistics of the situation. A woman in her 50s sat in the chair, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer hiking outfit that had clearly never seen actual hiking. She was scrolling through her phone, a large iced coffee in a cup holder attached to her chair. "Excuse me," David said, his voice carrying the polite firmness he'd learned during 30 years of managing construction projects. "You're blocking my driveway." The woman looked up, her eyes narrowing as she took in David's appearance. 62 years old, Asian American, wearing practical jeans and a flannel shirt. Not the type of person she was used to deferring to. "I'm not blocking anything," she said, her voice carrying the particular brand of entitlement that came with wealth and privilege. "This is a public road." "The road is public," David replied, pointing to the obvious driveway entrance behind her vehicle. "But you're parked directly in front of my private driveway. I need to get to my cabin." "Your cabin?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I don't think so. This whole area is being developed. I'm the site manager for the Mountain Vista resort project. This is all going to be luxury condos soon." David felt his stomach drop. I own this property. I have the deed, the tax records, everything. There's no resort project here." "Listen, mister." She waited for him to fill in the blank. When he didn't, she continued. "I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but I have investors flying in from Denver to see this property. They are paying me to secure the area and make sure no squatters or trespassers interfere with the development." "Squatters?" David's voice rose despite his effort to remain calm. "I bought this land 3 years ago. I have a cabin up that road. I pay taxes on it." The woman, Karen, he learned from the monogrammed coffee cup, stood up from her chair. She was tall, probably 5'8", and she used every inch of it to try to intimidate him. "I don't care what fake documents you think you have," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I know the real owner of this property, and you're not him. So I suggest you turn around and go back to wherever you came from before I call the police." David pulled out his phone, scrolling to his photos. "Here's my deed. Here's my tax bill. Here's a picture of my cabin." Karen barely glanced at the screen. Anyone can Photoshop documents these days. "I'm not impressed." "Then let me call the county recorder's office. We can settle this right now." "Don't bother." Karen sat back down, dismissing him with a wave of her hand. "I'm not moving until my investors see this property. They are coming next weekend, and I'm going to be right here to greet them." David stood there for a long moment, watching this woman who had somehow convinced herself that she owned his land. Part of him wanted to call the sheriff immediately, have her towed, make a scene. But the engineer in him, the part that had spent 3 decades solving complex problems, was already working on a different solution. "What's your name?" he asked. "Karen Westbrook." "Not that it's any of your business." "And you're going to be here every weekend?" "Every weekend until this deal closes." "Which should be about 6 weeks from now." David nodded slowly. "I see. Well, Karen, I hope you enjoy your weekends here. Just so you know, I'll be documenting everything. For my insurance company." "Something?" In his tone made her look up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all. Just that I like to keep good records." He smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Have a wonderful weekend, Karen. I'll see you next week." He walked back to his car, his mind already spinning through possibilities. 30 years of civil engineering had taught him that there was always a solution to any problem, you just had to think creatively enough to find it. That night, David sat in his hotel room and did research. Karen Westbrook was real enough, a self-employed real estate consultant with a history of what looked like questionable business practices. 3 lawsuits in the past 5 years, all settled out of court. 2 restraining orders from previous clients. A pattern of behavior that suggested she was either delusional or running some kind of long con. But the Mountain Vista Resort project she mentioned, that was real too. A legitimate development company was indeed planning a luxury resort in the area, just not on his property. They were building 5 miles south, on land that had been properly zoned and purchased. Karen had somehow gotten her wires crossed, or was deliberately trying to interfere with his property for reasons he couldn't fathom. David spent the next week making phone calls to the county recorder's office, confirming his ownership, to the real Mountain Vista Resort developers who had never heard of Karen Westbrook, to the sheriff's department who explained that they could remove her for trespassing, but that she'd probably just come back, to his insurance company, updating his policy and asking about coverage for malicious interference with property access. But most importantly, he called his old friend Jim Rodriguez, who ran a specialty construction company in Denver. "David. Buddy, what the hell do you need a hydraulic bollard system for?" Jim asked, laughing. "Planning to fortify your cabin against the zombie apocalypse." "Something like that," David said, studying the engineering specs he'd pulled up on his laptop. "I need something that can be installed quickly, operated remotely, and rated for about 5,000 pounds of impact force." Jesus. That's serious hardware. You know those things can do some real damage if someone hits them at speed. That's the idea. David, you're not thinking of doing anything stupid, are you? Because if some asshole is hassling you about your property, there are legal ways to handle it. David was quiet for a long moment. "Jim, how long have you known me?" 25 years. "In all that time, have you ever known me to do anything that wasn't carefully planned and completely legal?" "No, but then trust me. I need a bollard system that can be installed at the entrance to my driveway. Something that can be raised and lowered remotely. Something that will stop a vehicle from blocking my access to my own property." Jim was quiet for a moment. "You're going to post signs, right? Warning signs?" "Of course. Multiple signs. Very clear warnings." "I'm not trying to hurt anyone, Jim. I'm just trying to protect my right to access my own property." "Okay. I can have a crew up there next weekend. But David, be careful. Whatever you're planning, make sure you're on the right side of the law." "I'm always on the right side of the law," David said. "That's what makes this so satisfying." The third weekend, Karen was there again, this time with 2 folding chairs and a small cooler. She'd clearly settled in for the long haul. David parked on the main road and walked over to her. "Ms. Westbrook," he said politely, "I wanted to let you know that I'll be doing some construction work on my driveway next week. You might want to find a different place to park." Karen looked up from her phone, her expression one of amused disdain. "Your driveway? We've been through this. And I'm not going anywhere." My investors are coming next weekend and I need to be here to meet them. What investors, exactly? The Henderson Group. They are putting together a $50 million development deal. This is going to be the most exclusive resort in Colorado. David nodded. I called the Henderson Group yesterday. They've never heard of you. For the first time, Karen looked uncertain. You what? I called them. Explained the situation. They are building their resort 5 miles south of here. They have no interest in this property and they certainly haven't hired you to represent them. Karen's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, anger, then a KI. Karen Westbrook sat in her sister's cramped apartment, staring at the insurance adjuster's report for the 4th time in 2 days. The words hadn't changed: total loss due to operator negligence. Claim denied. Operator negligence, she muttered, crumpling the paper. Operator negligence. Karen, you need to let this go, her sister Linda said from the kitchen, where she was making another pot of coffee. You can't keep obsessing over this. Let it go. Karen's voice cracked. Linda. That bastard destroyed my car. My $80,000 car. He planned it, he set a trap, and he destroyed my car. You were trespassing on his property. You ignored warning signs. I was doing my job. Linda came into the living room carrying 2 mugs, her expression a mixture of pity and frustration. What job, Karen? You haven't had a real job in 2 years. You've been living off your divorce settlement, pretending to be some kind of high-powered real estate consultant. I am a real estate consultant. When's the last time you had a paying client? Karen opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. The truth was too painful to speak aloud. She hadn't had a legitimate client since her last lawsuit, when her reputation in the industry had been effectively destroyed. She'd been living on savings and credit cards, desperately trying to project an image of success while everything fell apart around her. That's not the point, she said finally. The point is that he set a trap. He deliberately damaged my vehicle. That's got to be illegal. Karen, I've been looking into this. Linda pulled out her laptop and opened a browser window. I've been researching property protection laws, Bollard systems, everything. What he did was completely legal. He posted warning signs, gave you multiple opportunities to leave, activated the system in front of a police officer. You don't have a case. There has to be something. False imprisonment, reckless endangerment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. With what money are you going to sue him? You can't even afford to fix your car. That was the brutal reality Karen had been avoiding. Her savings were gone. Her credit cards were maxed out. The divorce settlement that was supposed to last 5 years had evaporated in less than 3, spent on maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't afford and financing imaginary business ventures that never materialized. I'll find a lawyer who works on contingency, Karen said. And when they research the case and realize you don't have a leg to stand on, they'll drop you faster than you can say frivolous lawsuit. Karen stood up and began pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. There had to be something she could do, some way to make David Chen pay for what he'd done to her. The humiliation was unbearable, not just the destroyed car, but the way he'd looked at her afterward, with that calm, almost pitying expression. Like she was a problem he'd solved. I know what I'm going to do, she said suddenly. Linda looked up from her laptop. Karen, no. Whatever you're thinking, don't. I'm going to expose him. Social media, local news, everything. I'm going to tell everyone what kind of monster he is. A man who destroys other people's cars for fun. Karen, I'm going to ruin his reputation the way he ruined mine. We'll see how he likes being the target for once. Linda closed her laptop and stood up. Karen, sit down. We need to talk. I'm not sitting down. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to. Karen, sit down. The sharpness in Linda's voice made Karen stop pacing. She sat down. Reluctantly, her hands clenched into fists. You want to know what your real problem is? Linda said. It's not David Chen. It's not the Bollard system. It's not even the destroyed car. Your problem is that you can't accept responsibility for your own actions. I didn't do anything wrong. You trespassed on someone else's property for 3 weeks straight. You ignored warning signs. You lied about imaginary investors and non-existent business deals. You refused to leave when asked politely, then refused to leave when asked by the police. I was trying to make something of myself. By lying. By trespassing. By harassing some poor widower who just wanted to be left alone. Karen felt tears starting again. You don't understand. After the divorce, after the lawsuits, after everything fell apart, I needed to feel important again. I needed to feel like I was in control of something. So you picked a fight with a stranger on his own property. I thought if I could just bluff my way through it, maybe I could figure out a way to make it real. Maybe I could actually put together a development deal, find some real investors, make it all work somehow. Linda sat down beside her sister. Karen, honey, that's not how the world works. You can't just fake your way into success. You can't just lie until reality changes to match your lies. I know that now. Do you? Because you're sitting here planning to start a social media campaign against a man who was protecting his own property from someone who was harassing him. Karen wiped her eyes. He didn't have to destroy my car. Yes, he did. You gave him no choice. You were trespassing, you were blocking his access to his own property, and you refused to leave despite multiple warnings. What was he supposed to do, just let you stay there forever? He could have called the police. He did call the police. They told you to leave and you came back the next week. Karen was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what to do, Linda. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it. Your car is destroyed, your reputation is shot, and you're broke. The only thing you can do now is try to rebuild your life without making things worse. How am I supposed to do that? Get a real job. Stop pretending to be something you're not. Stop looking for shortcuts and get-rich-quick schemes. Accept that you're going to have to start over from the bottom. Karen looked around her sister's small apartment, the second-hand furniture, the cramped kitchen, the single bedroom that Linda had been sharing with her for the past month. This was her reality now. This was what her life had become. I can't live like this, she said quietly. You can't live like you were living either. That's what got you into this mess in the first place. Over the next week, Karen found herself obsessively researching David Chen. She found his LinkedIn profile, his professional history, his wife's obituary from 3 years ago. She found photos of his cabin, articles about his engineering projects, even his property tax records. What she found was a man who had lived a quiet, successful life. 30 years as a civil engineer, married to the same woman for 35 years, no children, no scandals, no lawsuits. After his wife died, he'd bought the cabin as a retreat, a place to process his grief and find some peace. And she had invaded that peace. She had made his life hell for 3 weeks, all because she couldn't accept that her own life had fallen apart. The more she learned about David, the worse she felt. He wasn't some corporate villain or slumlord. He was just a lonely widower who wanted to be left alone on his own property. And she had turned him into an enemy for no reason except her own desperation and pride. But knowing she was wrong didn't make the humiliation any easier to bear. The destroyed car, the deputy's report, the insurance denial, it all felt like a public execution of her remaining dignity. She was still wrestling with her anger and shame when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Is this Karen Westbrook? Yes, who is this? This is Rebecca Martinez with Channel 7 News. I understand you had an incident with a property owner who destroyed your vehicle with some kind of security system. Karen's heart jumped. How did you hear about that? We monitor police reports for interesting stories. This one definitely caught our attention. A man using a hydraulic bollard to destroy a trespasser's car. That's pretty unusual. It was completely illegal, Karen said, the words tumbling out. He set a trap. He deliberately damaged my vehicle. Would you be willing to do an interview? We are always interested in stories about property owners who might be going too far with their security measures. Karen looked at Linda, who was shaking her head frantically. Yes, Karen said. Yes, I'd be very interested in telling my story. The interview was scheduled for the next day. Karen spent the evening preparing, writing notes about her version of events, practicing her talking points. She was going to paint herself as a victim of a dangerous vigilante who had set a trap for innocent people. She was going to make David Chen pay for what he'd done to her. The next morning, Rebecca Martinez arrived with a camera crew. She was younger than Karen had expected, maybe 30, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made Karen slightly nervous. So tell me what happened, Rebecca said as they set up the shot. Karen launched into her prepared story. She was a real estate consultant. She had been conducting legitimate business. David Chen had set a dangerous trap and destroyed her vehicle without warning. What kind of legitimate business? Rebecca asked. I was scouting properties for a development project. What development project? The Mountain Vista Resort. It's a $50 million luxury development. Rebecca made a note. And you were authorized to be on Mr. Chen's property. I was told the property was part of the development area. By whom? Karen hesitated. By my clients. Can you give me their names? I'm not sure I should reveal client information on camera. Rebecca's expression sharpened. Ms. Westbrook, I did some research before coming here. The Mountain Vista Resort is being built 5 miles south of Mr. Che. 6 months after the Bollard incident, David Chen stood on his cabin porch for the last time, watching the sunrise paint the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The moving truck would arrive in 3 hours, and by evening, he'd be on a plane to Phoenix, leaving behind the sanctuary that had sheltered his grief for 3 years. The cabin had sold faster than expected. Karen Westbrook had proven surprisingly competent as a real estate agent, thorough, honest, professional in a way that suggested she'd learned something valuable from their confrontation. The commission from the sale would help her rebuild her life, which was exactly what David had hoped for when he'd requested her services. His phone buzzed. A text from Karen, buyers confirmed for 2 p.m. walkthrough. Final paperwork ready for signing. Thank you again for this opportunity. David smiled. The woman who had once terrorized his peace with her entitled delusions had become someone he could actually work with. It was a small miracle, the kind that happened when people finally accepted responsibility for their actions. He was loading the last of his personal items into his truck when another vehicle pulled up the newly cleared driveway. Not Karen, she was meeting the buyers at her office. This was a silver BMW sedan, expensive and immaculate. David didn't recognize it. A man got out of the BMW, mid-40s, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had the kind of aggressive confidence that David had learned to distrust, the bearing of someone who was used to getting his way through intimidation and money. Are you David Chen? The man called out as he approached. Yes. Can I help you? I'm Brad Morrison. I represent a development consortium that's very interested in this property. David set down the box he was carrying. The property is sold. The closing is this afternoon. Yes, I know. That's actually why I'm here. Morrison pulled out a tablet and began swiping through documents. My clients are prepared to offer you substantially more than your current buyer. Cash deal, no contingencies, close in 48 hours. How much more? 50% above your agreed price. David raised an eyebrows. The property was already selling for a fair market value. A 50% premium suggested either desperation or money laundering. Why? This area is about to become very valuable. My clients want to position themselves ahead of the development curve. What development? The Mountain Vista Resort is 5 miles south of here. Morrison smiled, and something about the expression reminded David unpleasantly of Karen Westbrook in her delusional phase. There are other projects in the pipeline. Projects that haven't been announced yet. Such as? I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics. But I can tell you that your property sits at a strategic location that could become extremely valuable very quickly. David studied Morrison carefully. The expensive clothes, the cash offer, the vague promises of future development, it all felt familiar. Mr. Morrison, I'm curious about something. How did you know I was selling this property? Word gets around in development circles. The listing only went live 3 days ago. It's not exactly common knowledge. Morrison's smile flickered slightly. My clients have extensive networks in the real estate industry. And they sent you here to a property that's already under contract to make an unsolicited offer based on secret development projects that you can't discuss. Sometimes opportunity requires quick action. David pulled out his phone and did a quick search for Brad Morrison Development. The results were interesting. Morrison had been involved in several questionable land deals over the past few years, including one that had resulted in federal charges for fraud. The charges had been dropped, but the pattern was clear. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your interest, but the property is sold. Mr. Chen, you're making a mistake. The offer I'm making represents a significant profit for you. I'm not interested in profit. I'm interested in selling to the right buyer. Morrison's facade of politeness began to crack. The right buyer? You mean that pathetic woman who's handling your listing? Do you have any idea what kind of person you're dealing with? David felt a familiar tension in his shoulders. What do you mean? Karen Westbrook is a fraud. She's been involved in multiple lawsuits, has a history of misrepresenting properties, and was recently involved in some kind of incident where she was caught trespassing on private property. How do you know about that? I make it my business to know about the people I might have to work with. That woman is trouble, Mr. Chen. She'll say anything, do anything, to close a deal. David stepped closer to Morrison, his engineer's mind already cataloguing the ways this conversation could go wrong. Mr. Morrison, I think you should leave. I'm trying to help you avoid a serious mistake. No, you're trying to manipulate me into breaking a legal contract. And you're doing it by attacking someone who has worked hard to rebuild her reputation. Morrison's mask slipped completely. Fine. You want to be an idiot, that's your business. But when this deal falls through because your agent is incompetent, don't say I didn't warn you. The deal won't fall through. We'll see about that. Morrison turned to leave, then stopped. You know what's funny? I heard about your little security system. The Bollard that destroyed Westbrook's car. Very creative. But you should know that not everyone is as easily intimidated as one delusional woman in an SUV. David felt ice in his veins. What's that supposed to mean? It means that some people don't respond well to threats. Some people fight back. Morrison got back in his BMW and drove away, leaving David standing in his driveway with a growing sense of unease. The conversation had felt like a threat, though nothing Morrison had said was explicitly threatening. It was the kind of veiled intimidation that wealthy developers were famous for, plausible deniability wrapped around a core of menace. David called Karen immediately. Karen, it's David. I need to ask you something. Have you heard of a man named Brad Morrison? Morrison? No, I don't think so. Why? He just showed up at my cabin, claiming to represent a development consortium. He wants to buy the property for 50% above our agreed price. 50%. David, that's a lot of money. It's also suspicious as hell. He knew about the Bollard incident, knew about your history. He was trying to convince me that you're untrustworthy. There was a long pause. Are you having second thoughts about working with me? No. But I'm worried that someone might be trying to interfere with our deal. What do you mean interfere? I don't know yet. But Morrison didn't feel like a legitimate businessman. He felt like someone with an agenda. David, the buyers are solid. I've verified their financing, their employment, everything. The deal is going to close. I hope you're right. But Karen, be careful. If Morrison or anyone associated with him contacts you, don't meet with them alone. Don't sign anything. And call me immediately. You're scaring me. Good. A little healthy paranoia might keep you out of trouble. After hanging up, David stood on his porch and looked out at the forest that had been his refuge for 3 years. Something was happening here, something that involved his property and Karen's past. He could feel it building like a storm on the horizon. His phone rang. Karen again. David, we have a problem. What kind of problem? The buyers just called. They are backing out. David felt his stomach drop. Why? They said they received information about title issues with the property. Claims that there might be liens or encumbrances that weren't disclosed. That's impossible. I ran a full title search before listing. The property is clear. I know. But they are spooked. They don't want to risk getting involved in a legal dispute. What kind of information did they receive? Anonymous email. Claimed to be from a concerned party who wanted to prevent them from making a serious mistake. David closed his eyes. Morrison. You think he contacted them directly? I think he's trying to sabotage our deal so he can swoop in with his cash offer. But why? If it's just about development potential, there are plenty of other properties in the area. That's what I intend to find out. David spent the next hour on the phone with his attorney, discussing options. The legal advice was clear: Morrison hadn't done anything explicitly illegal. Contacting potential buyers with concerns about a property was unethical but not criminal, especially if the concerns were presented as genuine questions rather than deliberate sabotage. But David had spent 30 years in construction, an industry where intimidation and corruption were unfortunately common. He recognized the pattern Morrison was following: create doubt about the current deal, then present himself as the solution to imaginary problems. The question was why Morrison wanted this specific property so badly. David's cabin sat on 20 acres of mountainous wilderness, beautiful but not particularly unique in a state full of similar properties. Unless Morrison knew something about the area that David didn't, his phone rang again. This time it was Jim Rodriguez, the contractor, who had installed the Bollard system. David, I just got a weird call. Someone asking about the security system I installed at your place. What kind of questions? Technical stuff. How it works, how to disable it, whether there are backup systems. Claimed to be an insurance investigator. But something felt off. Did you give him any information? Hell no. I told him to contact you directly if he had questions. But David, why would an insurance investigator be asking about your Bollard system? Because so. Deputy Sheriff Maria Santos had seen a lot of strange things during her 15 years patrolling the Colorado mountains, but she'd never seen anything quite like the scene that greeted her at David Chen's property. A massive black pickup truck hung suspended 3 feet off the ground, impaled on a steel bollard like a beetle on a pin. 2 men in tactical gear stood beside the wreckage, calmly packing equipment into military-style cases. Gentlemen, I need to see some identification. Santos called out as she approached, her hand resting on her service weapon. The taller of the 2 men, late 30s with the bearing of ex-military, reached slowly into his jacket and produced a leather wallet. Marcus Webb, private security consultant. This is my associate, Tony Vega. Santos examined the ID carefully. It looked legitimate, but something about these men set off every alarm bell in her cop brain. What's your business here, Mr. Webb? We were conducting a property assessment for a potential buyer. Unfortunately, we weren't aware of the security system. Property assessment. Santos looked at the destroyed pickup truck, then at the sophisticated equipment they were packing. With surveillance gear. Environmental monitoring equipment. Webb said smoothly. Our client has concerns about potential contamination issues. David approached the group, still recording with his phone. Deputy Santos, these men were trespassing on my property. They ignored clearly posted warnings about the security system. Santos had responded to the original Bollard incident 6 months ago. She remembered David as a polite, methodical man who had followed every legal requirement to the letter. These tactical operators were a different breed entirely. Mr. Chen, can you walk me through what happened here? David explained the sequence of events, from Morrison's initial contact through the sabotaged real estate deal to the surveillance he'd discovered. Santos took notes, but her attention was split between David's account and Webb's behavior. The security consultant was too calm, too professional. Most people who just had their vehicle destroyed would be angry, upset, demanding compensation. Webb acted like this was just another day at the office. Mr. Webb, who's your client? I'm not at liberty to disclose that information. Client confidentiality. This is a criminal investigation now. Trespassing, potential stalking, harassment. Client confidentiality doesn't apply to criminal activity. Webb exchanged a glance with his partner. We'll need to consult with our legal department before providing any client information. Santos felt her patience wearing thin. Mr. Webb, you can consult with your legal department from the county jail if you prefer. I'm investigating multiple crimes here, and your cooperation would be appreciated. Of course, Deputy. We want to cooperate fully. But I'm sure you understand that we have professional obligations to our clients. Santos turned to David. Mr. Chen, do you want to press charges for trespassing? Absolutely. Then I'm going to need both of you gentlemen to come with me to the station for questioning. Webb smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Deputy. We have a flight to catch. Not anymore, you don't. Santos was reaching for her handcuffs when her radio crackled to life. Unit 47, this is dispatch. We need you to respond to a structure fire on Beacon Hill Road, Priority 1. Santos hesitated. Beacon Hill Road was 20 minutes away, and a structure fire took precedence over a trespassing investigation. But she didn't want to leave David alone with these men. Mr. Chen, do you have somewhere safe you can go while I handle this fire call? This is my property. I'm not leaving. I understand, but Deputy Santos, Webb interrupted, we're not going anywhere either. Our vehicle is inoperable and we'll need to arrange for recovery. We'll be here for several hours at least. Santos looked at the impaled pickup truck. Then at David, then at the two tactical operators who seemed far too comfortable with the situation. Every instinct told her not to leave, but the structure fire couldn't wait. Mr. Chen, I'm going to leave Officer Kim here to secure the scene until I get back. Don't interact with these men any more than necessary. Actually, Deputy, Webb said, Officer Kim won't be necessary. We called our recovery team before you arrived. They'll be here within the hour to extract our vehicle. We won't be staying long. Santos didn't like it, but she was out of options. Mr. Chen, call me immediately if there are any problems. Mr. Webb, I'll be back to continue our conversation. After Santos left, David found himself alone on his property with two professional operators whose truck was impaled on his Bollard system. The irony wasn't lost on him, his security measure had trapped the very people it was supposed to deter. Webb approached David with the casual confidence of someone who wasn't particularly concerned about being stuck in a remote location with a man he'd been surveilling. Mr. Chen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Let me be direct with you. My client is prepared to make you an offer that would resolve this situation cleanly. What kind of offer? $500,000 above fair market value for your property. Cash, no contingencies, you keep everything that happened here today confidential. David felt his stomach drop. $500,000 above market value was serious money, the kind of offer that suggested his property was worth far more than he'd imagined. Why is my land so valuable to your client? That's not really my area of expertise. I'm just the messenger. Who's your client? Webb smiled. Someone who values privacy and efficiency. Someone who doesn't like complications. David looked at the destroyed pickup truck, at the sophisticated equipment, at Webb's tactical gear. And someone who's willing to use intimidation to get what they want. Mr. Chen, let me share something with you. In my line of work, I deal with all kinds of property disputes. Some people are reasonable. They accept fair compensation and move on with their lives. Other people. Webb gestured toward the impaled Truck. Other people make things more complicated than they need to be. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. My client wants this property. He's prepared to pay well above market value to get it. But his patience isn't unlimited. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What happens if his patience runs out? That would depend on how unreasonable you choose to be. Before David could respond, the sound of heavy engines filled the air. 2 large recovery trucks were making their way up the mountain road, followed by a convoy of black SUVs. Webb said, checking his watch. Our ride is here. The recovery operation was a thing of mechanical precision. Within 30 minutes, the destroyed pickup truck had been extracted from the Bollard and loaded onto a flatbed trailer. The tactical equipment was redistributed among the SUVs. Webb and Vega supervised the operation with military efficiency. As the convoy prepared to leave, Webb approached David one final time. Mr. Chen, my client appreciates directness. You have 48 hours to consider his offer. After that, the terms become less favorable. Less favorable how? Property values can fluctuate based on many factors. Environmental concerns, infrastructure problems, legal complications. It would be unfortunate if your property became difficult to sell for any reason. Webb got into one of the SUVs and the entire convoy disappeared down the mountain road, leaving David alone with his Bollard system and a growing sense that he'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple real estate dispute. David called his attorney immediately. Paul, I need you to research something for me. I need to know who might have advanced knowledge of Forest Service development plans in this area. David, what's going on? You sound shaken. I just had a visit from professional intimidators offering me $500,000 above market value for my cabin. Either my property is sitting on a gold mine, or someone needs it badly enough to commit serious crimes to get it. $500,000 above market. David, maybe you should consider, Paul, these weren't real estate developers. These were military contractors. The kind of people who solve problems with violence when money doesn't work. Jesus. What do you want to do? I want to know who they are working for, and I want to know why my property is worth risking federal charges to acquire. David spent the next several hours researching everything he could find about Forest Service development plans, federal land use policies, and recent environmental impact studies. What he discovered was a complex web of corporate interests, government agencies, and political connections that made Morrison's harassment campaign look like amateur hour. His property wasn't just a transportation choke point. It was the key to unlocking a massive resource extraction project that had been in development for years, hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and corporate shells. The new Forest Service development wasn't for recreation. It was for mining. Specifically, for extracting rare earth elements that had been discovered in geological surveys 3 years ago but kept classified for national security reasons. The mining rights had been quietly sold to a consortium of defense contractors, and David's property controlled the only practical access route to the site. The people trying to force him to sell weren't just wealthy developers. They were part of a multi-billion-dollar defense project with connections reaching into the highest levels of government. David was still processing this information when the helicopters circling David's property bore the distinctive markings of the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group, not the corporate logos he'd feared. Through his security cameras, David watched as federal agents in tactical gear rappelled from the aircraft, quickly establishing a perimeter around his property. His phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Chen, this is Special Agent Sarah Pierce, FBI. We need to talk. David looked out at the chaos he'd created, Webb's tactical teams trapped in his security maze, their vehicles disabled by pressure plates and hydraulic barriers, emergency lights strobing through the mountain darkness. Agent Pierce, I assume you're here about the armed trespassers on my property. Mr. Chen, we've been investigating Apex Resource Solutions for 6 months. Your security systems just handed us the biggest break in our case. Relief flooded through David. You know about the mining operation. We know about a lot more than that. Can you safely deactivate your security systems? We need to take these people into custody. David pulled out his phone and began shutting down his defenses one by one. Floodlights dimmed to normal levels. Sirens went silent and hydraulic barriers retracted into the ground. Within minutes, FBI agents were moving through his property, methodically arresting Webb's team. An hour later, David sat on his porch with Agent Pierce, watching as the last of the tactical operators was loaded into federal transport vehicles. The mountains were quiet again, peaceful in a way they hadn't been for months. "Mr. Chen, I have to ask, how did you know to build all this?" David gestured toward the hidden Bollard system. 6 months ago, a woman named Karen Westbrook spent 3 weeks trespassing on my property. She ignored every warning, every request to leave. The Bollard system was my solution to that problem. And the rest of it? I'm an engineer. Once I started thinking about property security, I kept improving the design. Motion sensors, pressure plates, automated barriers, it was just a series of engineering challenges. Pierce shook her head. "Mr. Chen, what you built here is more sophisticated than most military installations. You turned your property into an impregnable fortress. I turned my property into a place where consequences are real and immediate. Some people learn from warnings. Others need to experience the results of their choices directly." Pierce consulted her notes. "We are going to need your cooperation with our investigation. Apex Resource Solutions is connected to a conspiracy that reaches into multiple federal agencies. What you've uncovered here could bring down some very powerful people." "What about my property? Am I safe now?" "The mining operation was based on falsified geological surveys. There are no rare earth deposits here. The whole thing was a money laundering scheme using federal contracts. Once that becomes public, your property will go back to being exactly what it appears to be, a peaceful mountain retreat." David felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "And Karen Westbrook? What about her?" "She's selling the property for me. I want to make sure this doesn't affect her real estate license or her new career." Pierce smiled. "Mr. Chen, Ms. Westbrook isn't in any trouble. If anything, her cooperation in documenting the harassment you received has been helpful to our investigation." As if summoned by their conversation, Karen's car appeared at the end of the driveway. She parked at a respectful distance and approached cautiously, clearly unsure whether the situation was resolved or still dangerous. "David, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Karen." "Agent Pierce, this is Karen Westbrook, my real estate agent." Pierce stood and shook Karen's hand. "Ms. Westbrook, your documentation of the harassment campaign against Mr. Chen has been very helpful. We particularly appreciated the recording you made of Brad Morrison's threats." Karen looked confused. "What recording?" "The voicemail Morrison left on your office phone yesterday, threatening to destroy your real estate license if you didn't withdraw from the sale." David turned to Karen. "You didn't tell me about that." Karen looked embarrassed. "I didn't want to worry you. And I wasn't going to let some corporate thug intimidate me into abandoning a client." Agent Pierce smiled. "Ms. Westbrook, that recording helped us establish the conspiracy charges. Morrison's threat to use federal regulatory agencies to retaliate against you crossed several felony lines. What's going to happen to him?" "He's looking at 20 to life for conspiracy, racketeering, and about a dozen other federal charges. His cooperation might reduce that, but he's going to prison for a very long time." After Agent Pierce left, David and Karen stood on the porch looking out at the peaceful mountain landscape. The floodlights were off, the sirens silent, the Bollard retracted into its hidden position. It looked like nothing had ever happened. "David, I have to ask, how long have you been planning all this?" "I wasn't planning anything. I just kept solving problems as they arose. The Bollard for you, the pressure plates after I realized someone was surveilling the property, the barriers when I figured out they might try to trap me here." "You mean this whole fortress was built one piece at a time?" "Engineering is an iterative process. You identify a problem, design a solution, test it, refine it. Each new threat required a new countermeasure." Karen was quiet for a moment. "David, I need to apologize again. All of this started because I was trespassing on your property. If I hadn't been so stubborn, so entitled, none of this would have happened. Karen, if you hadn't been trespassing on my property, I never would have built the security system that caught these people. In a way, your mistake led to stopping a major federal crime. So my stupidity accidentally saved the day. David smiled. Your stupidity led to my engineering solution, which led to their downfall. It's like chaos theory, small actions can have massive consequences. Speaking of consequences, Karen said, I have some news about the sale. Let me guess, it fell through again. Actually, no. The FBI's investigation cleared up all the title issues Morrison created. Your original buyers want to proceed with the purchase. They are even more interested now that they know the property has advanced security features. David laughed. I should probably include an instruction manual. About that, Agent Pierce asked me to give you this. Karen handed him a business card. The FBI's engineering research facility wants to consult with you about property security systems. Apparently, what you built here has some applications for federal facilities. David studied the card. They want to hire me. They want to learn from you. Turns out that designing security systems to stop entitled trespassers is also effective against professional criminals. Interesting. What about you? Are you staying in real estate? Karen nodded. I'm discovering I'm actually good at it when I'm honest about what I know and don't know. Amazing how much easier the job gets when you stop lying to everyone, including yourself. And you're okay with staying in Colorado. Not too many bad memories. Actually, I think Colorado has been good for me. This place taught me some important lessons about consequences and responsibility. I'd like to stick around and keep learning. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The forest was peaceful. The air clean and crisp, the silence broken only by the sound of wind through the pine trees. David, can I ask you something personal? Sure. When you activated that Bollard 6 months ago, when you destroyed my car, were you angry? Were you trying to hurt me? David considered the question carefully. No, I wasn't angry. And I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to solve a problem. You were blocking access to my property, you refused to leave voluntarily, and you ignored clearly posted warnings about security systems. The Bollard was simply the consequence of those choices. But you knew it would destroy my car. I knew it would stop your car from blocking my driveway. The destruction was a side effect, not the goal. And today, with Webb's people, same principle. They were threatening me on my own property, they ignored warnings, they refused to leave peacefully. My security systems responded exactly as designed. Karen nodded slowly. So it wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was just a physics. Physics doesn't care about your intentions or your feelings. It just responds to your actions. Push against an immovable object and you experience an equal and opposite reaction. Ignore warnings about security systems, and you face the consequences. That's a hard way to look at the world. But it's an honest way. People can lie, manipulate, rationalize their behavior. Physics just is. Cause and effect, action and reaction, choice and consequence. Karen smiled. You know what's funny? That Bollard destroying my car was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to stop lying to myself, stop pretending to be something I wasn't, stop trying to fake my way through life. Sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most painful experiences. And sometimes the most painful experiences come from our own choices. David's phone buzzed. A text from Agent Pierce, Mr. Chen, final count, 23 arrests, including 3 federal employees. Morrison is cooperating fully. Case closed. Well done. David showed the text to Karen. 23 arrests. All because a delusional woman insisted on parking her Range Rover in my driveway. All because an engineer refused to let anyone ignore clearly posted warnings. They watched the last of the federal vehicles disappear down the mountain road, leaving Dav.